Thank you for listening today to the Conformed to Christ podcast, where we seek to engage the mind, affect the heart, and call people to follow Christ. My name is George Mays. Here with me is Jay Jones.
Good morning. Text-driven Tuesday time.
Text-driven Tuesday. I am tired, Jay.
Really?
I'm tired. Daylight savings time hit me really hard this year.
Yeah. Yesterday, I get up early. You know, I always get up early. It's my practice when I'm preaching. Get up early before everybody else. Go through my sermon, and I hit that snooze button, and I instantly went back to dreamland. That doesn't usually happen. You know, you're kind of awake, but I was like out cold. 5 minutes they transpire in the real world, and in dreamland, like a couple hours go by.
Yeah,
and then I'm awake again. So
yeah, it was rough. We'll see how my notes. I haven't gone over my notes from your sermon yet, so we'll see how well I took notes, because I was a little bit of a zombie yesterday.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, hopefully I was able to hold your attention.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I found something a few days ago, Jay, that went along with our Free for All Friday.
Okay.
And I thought it was pretty funny, so I thought I'd bring it in
All right.
today. So we, if you haven't listened to our Free for All Friday from last week, we talked about the government's preparations, trying to prep us for nuclear war.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to protect us from nuclear fallout, they want to make sure that we have hand sanitizer and mask and stay 6 feet away, right?
Right.
Because there's nothing worse during nuclear war than
Catching
to come
COVID.
down with COVID. Well, the Atlantic, which is I don't know, does it even have a print form, or is it just online?
I don't know.
It's just a online magazine, I think. They tweeted out a headline that caught my eye. I thought it was pretty good. If we can go over to, well, I just lost it, Jay.
Oh no, George.
Okay. I'm not using my iPad today. I left my iPad at home. All right, here we go. If we want to switch over, a nuclear war would kill tens of millions of people and would also prove disastrous for climate change.
Oh, yeah. Good night. It would cause more global warming, huh?
Yeah, you could
all
say
the
that.
Dust particles in the air, and trapping the UV light, heating the earth.
Yeah. So
tens of millions.
I thought that it's written by Robinson Meyer. I was expecting it to be like John Kerry or something.
Right. Interesting.
So there you go, Jay. We've got to avoid nuclear war.
But it balances
if we're going to save our planet from global warming.
But for them and their perverted worldview, it balances out, because like less people is better.
Yeah.
So less people, less climate change.
Right. I don't know.
Wait till that article comes out. I just wait.
Yeah.
Nuclear war wouldn't be that bad,
it wouldn't
guys.
be that bad, because
it's coming. Someone will write that.
Yeah.
Well, shall we drop into this?
Or what? Let's do it. Yeah. Well, I'm still thinking about that polar bear floating out there on that ice.
Yeah.
Before Putin launches nuclear warheads, think about the polar bears.
Yeah.
Putin. All right. Did I mention I'm tired?
Yes, you did.
Okay. All right. All right. Let's look at Habakkuk. So we're still in Habakkuk chapter 1. Why don't you give us like the flow? Give us kind of a reminder of what's been going on since it's been a few weeks, and then we'll get into the passage.
Okay. All right. So Habakkuk is, if you go to the New Testament. So first off, it's toward the end. It's one of those smaller books that you flip back and forth and you can't find because pages are stuck together. It's not on very many pages. It takes up a total of 3 pages in my Bible.
Those are rookie numbers.
Yeah,
Jay,
know,
look at
yeah.
this. Look at this.
I got the
1, 2, 3, 4,
You got 4?
5.
I got dual column.
Top of 6.
Dual column, twice the words, 1 page. It's more environment friendly. So Habakkuk, go to the New Testament, go backwards a couple books there, and there you will find it. Habakkuk is a prophet to the southern kingdom. Northern kingdom has already been destroyed. Syria has conquered that. It's gone, never to return. Judah is the holdout, but they're starting to follow in this pattern of paganism. You can see this pattern in Kings and Chronicles. Things are getting really bad. They even look like the Canaanites. They're doing child sacrifice, all kinds of horrific things. You can go back and listen to that first sermon. So Habakkuk laments. That's how the book starts. He's lamenting to God. Look how wicked your people have become. Why do you make me look at wickedness all day? And you're idle. That's kind of like it's an accusation. Without sinning, he's not accusing God of sin. He's grappling with the question of God is sovereign. Things don't have to be like they are, but they are that way. And so why? Like, how long are you going to let this continue? Why is it happening? Not that he's blaming God. He's just struggling with why it's happening, knowing that he could raise up a prophet. He could raise up a new king. It's not happening. He's lamenting the evil of Judah. God responds. So in verse 5, God responds and he says, I'm not idle. I'm at work. Look what I'm doing. I'm raising up the Babylonians, the Chaldeans. The term is Chaldeans, synonymous with Babylonians. Raising up the Chaldeans, and they're going to judge. They're God's instrument. They're like a divinely inspired, empowered human army. They're unstoppable. They march through the earth and conquer everything. And they're appointed for the task of judging Judah for their sin. So God will stop the sin and the evil in the land, but he does so by sending judgment. And this he promised to do in Deuteronomy. Moses warned them that this would happen. God keeps his promises. But this news it's devastating, obviously. It's unbelievable. Like, the people, God would really do this. They don't think that he will act in this way. And so Habakkuk then, he starts to respond to God. So Habakkuk's second kind of statements are here in 12. That's where we are, verse 12. Now he laments again or complains again, but it's important that we see it in the context of how he does this, because he's grappling with this again. Okay, they're wicked, but the Babylonians seem to be way worse. And so in the midst of Habakkuk's second complaint to God, we really kind of see what it looks like to express faith in God when you get really bad news. By really bad news, I mean like earth-shattering, like your world's never going to be the same again. Like, obviously, Babylonians are coming, they're going to conquer and destroy you. Well, I mean, we may not experience that. We may, right? We could have invading armies. Who knows? But if you live long enough, kind of the way I started this is, you're going to get some type of news that shakes your world like Habakkuk was shaken. It's just a matter of when. We live in a fallen world. You know, when you're young, you don't think bad things will ever happen, like, because you never experience them. Like, people usually, your friends aren't dying. Mm-hmm. The older you get, the more friends you see die, the more bad things you see happening. And the older you get, the worse it gets. I mean, none of us gets out of here without getting some type of bad news. Like, knock at the door in the middle of the night, phone call in the middle of the night. Sometime it's coming. Bad diagnosis of health. So what do you do when your whole world is turned upside down by bad news? And Habakkuk he demonstrates, I think, what faith looks like. And what he does here is there kind of three expressions of his faith in God that I think can help us, that we should adopt. And okay, they're better adopted beforehand. Like, you want to put that in your tool bag
right
before something happens, not during.
Right.
And that's what it gets at the sufficiency of Scripture. That's kind of how when I was having people flip to their Bibles, it's like, hey, open your Bibles, flip. And that's what I was reminded of this week, that the Bible literally speaks to every situation a human could encounter, and sufficiently.
Right.
So
yeah, I thought that was good because I think that a lot of people they affirm that the Bible is inerrant, but they have a problem with sufficiency. That yes, it doesn't have any errors in it, but it doesn't speak to this area in my life.
Yeah.
And so I appreciated you doing that. That's something that comes up in biblical counseling. A lot of people don't like biblical counseling because they don't believe that the scriptures are sufficient for everything that a person encounters. But that's not what the scripture itself says. Peter in 2 Peter 1, he says that God has given us everything for life and godliness. And so that's the sufficiency of scripture. So let's have you read this section. We're going into, there's a little bit of a weird chapter division.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows why? I mean, he's still talking, and I don't know. All right, so let's.
But people put them in way after the fact,
right?
These chapter divisions,
right?
I mean, I would think the most natural one would be when God starts talking again. But okay,
yeah, that's weird.
So I'll read through 2:1.
Okay, all right. Well, let's have you read it.
All right, let's switch over to that iPad then. Okay, here we go. Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, you have ordained them as a judgment, and you, O Rock, have established them for reproof. You who are of purer eyes than to see evil, and cannot look at wrong, why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he? You make mankind like the fish of the sea, like crawling things that have no ruler. He brings all of them up with a hook. He drags them out with his net. He gathers them in his dragnet, so he rejoices and is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his net and makes offerings to his dragnet, for by them he lives in luxury, and his food is rich. Is he then to keep on emptying his net and mercilessly killing nations forever? I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower, and look out to see what he will say to me, and what I will answer concerning my complaint.
Just reading it again, that is such a weird
chapter
division. I don't know why. I don't remember the guy's name who did the chapter divisions. That's a weird one though.
Yeah,
that's probably when his horse hit a bump or something.
Yeah.
He made a
mark
where he shouldn't have. All right, so there's you've got 3 expressions of faith to help you through tough times, and so we've got Habakkuk, and he gives us an example of how to prayerfully remember our God, how to complain faithfully to God, and then to wait diligently for God.
Yeah.
Did I get those?
Yeah, yeah. Remember prayerfully your God.
All right.
Yeah, so I think it's what's interesting about it is I try to phrase these in a way to where people could like if you just say Habakkuk remembers prayerfully his God, people are prone to take one step of removal.
Right.
But what I wanted to try to communicate was, look, we're watching an example God's given us on how we are to do it.
Right.
So I tried to phrase it in a way where you could say easily and remember when something happens or you're going through something, I am to remember prayerfully my God.
By doing that, you're not just teaching us the passage, but you're teaching us what we're supposed to do with the passage.
Right.
A lot of people, I guess, they look at expository preaching like it's just this heady lecture. It's just communicating facts.
Right.
When what it's supposed to do is what we say at the beginning of our podcast, right?
Right.
Where we are setting out to engage the mind through actually explaining the passage, but we don't stop there. We affect the heart. We want your emotions, your affections to be moved, so that you'll live a certain way.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so you're not just leaving us at Habakkuk. You're leading us to, I'm supposed to do something with this
Mm-hmm.
this passage. All right, so we're supposed to prayerfully remember our God.
Uh-huh.
All right, so walk us through. It's just one verse that you've got for this.
Yeah. Verse 12.
Okay.
Yeah. So after getting the worst news of his life, I mean, you got to try to put yourself in his shoes for a second, right? It'd be like God telling you the United States is about to be destroyed. Like every city is going to be in rubble. It's going to be a wasteland. Think about it like a nuclear total destruction, and that's what would happen to them. But without
and climate change,
right, yeah, and that's what would happen to his people. God has promised that it will happen, and just think about how that news would hit you. He could do a lot of things. A lot of people may run and tell their friends, like, first off, you won't believe what's going to happen. Like, I don't even know how to make sense of this. Help me make sense of it. He doesn't hop on some group chat, right? Judean group chat, which I guess would be the city gates, right, back then, and start talking. How do we make sense of this? Like, what's going to happen? How do we prepare? Like, the first thing he does is he just clings to God. And that's nobody really knows a lot about Habakkuk, and his name means something like clings or embraces. And you can almost get the picture of someone who's just a grappler. Like, you can get the picture that Habakkuk is now just holding on to God's feet, or he's got his arms wrapped around his legs because he doesn't know what else to do. So he goes immediately to God in prayer. So he's praying to God, but what's interesting is he's praying to God the truths about God. He's praying theology.
Yeah. I was trying to work through this in my mind while you were preaching. I think the response to pray is maybe easy for a lot of people, even for unbelievers. I mean, you have that old saying that there's no atheist in foxholes.
Mm-hmm.
That when bad things happen, people almost reflectively reach out to God,
right? Like an instinct,
right? But it's that second aspect of this that I don't think people do a good job with,
right?
That they are theologically informed,
right,
in their prayers.
Yeah, and as I was thinking about that, theology is not just a hobby,
right?
I think, unfortunately, for some people, it is a hobby.
Mm-hmm.
They've got gazillions of books they've read. They have tons of knowledge about who God is.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's practical.
Right.
Like if it's just an intellectual endeavor, and I compared it to people who know everything about the Star Wars universe. I mean, you got people that are fans.
Right.
They're fans of theology. They're fans of Star Wars theology.
Uh-huh.
They know that, like, every tale of the Sith and all these hidden things you could never dream of.
Yeah.
And that type of knowledge about God and theology is not going to help you. You can also have wrong theology.
Mm-hmm.
Lack of theology or wrong theology and suffering's happening. That's going to break you. It's going to destroy you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the kind of prayer that Habakkuk is praying here is not going to be found at Joel Osteen's church, because the theology is not there.
Right.
Right. If your theology is that God just wants to bless you and always, show you favor, and that means that you're going to have good things come into your life, and it's, your best life now. And then when something bad happens, your theology is so bad that there's no way that you're going to be able to deal with it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So he talks about theology. So what kind of theology are we we seeing here?
He rehearses. Well, he's praying to God. God doesn't need to know who he is.
Mm-hmm.
He knows who he is, right? So why pray theologically? It's because Habakkuk is reminding himself. Like, he's trying to, his whole world is shaken, right? Pretend there's an earthquake happening and there's just sand everywhere and he's sinking in the sand. He needs like a bedrock, a foundation that's not going to move. Yeah. He can reestablish himself on and get his bearings. Okay. And that's God's character and nature. Mm-hmm. And that's what he prays.
Okay.
So he's not doing it for God's sake, he's doing it for his own sake. But it's a great example. And so there are four components of, I guess, of who God is in his nature that really kind of stand out. In verse 12, the first one is that God is eternal. And the word eternal, it means just an indeterminate amount of time into the past or into the future. We can say eternal, but we would just say forever.
Mm-hmm.
Are you not from forever? Like, you're boundless. That you are not contained within time and space. That's what he's getting at. Time and space. Time is just matter and motion. God's not bound by space-time. We call it space-time. God's not bound by space-time. He's existed from forever.
Okay, so let's put ourselves in Habakkuk's shoes. God just told him that the Babylonians are coming. They're going to destroy the city. How is God's eternality a comfort? How does that help him?
Because when you put together in like the Hebrew mind, they profess this belief about their God. The truth of who God is that he didn't come into being in time. He's not bound by circumstances in the world. That's kind of the idea. And God uses it to encourage his people throughout the Bible. There were a lot. I mean, I had to axe like a gazillion Bible verses.
Yeah.
So just a couple of them and the ways that God's eternality is a comfort. Isaiah 40, 28 through 29, God says to his people through the prophet, "Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is an everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth." And that kind of gets at it, right? God created this place. He does not faint or grow weary, and his understanding is unsearchable. And he gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might, he increases strength. So when things in your life are going terrible, we're able to remember God's eternal. He's a creator. He's not surprised by circumstances. He's ordained the end from the beginning, and he's able to give power to the faint.
Would this maybe have a subheading that would include God's knowledge?
Mm-hmm.
Like he knows what he's doing,
right?
So the Babylonians are not. He's not just randomly picking a people to do this,
right?
In his infinite eternal wisdom,
yeah,
he knows exactly what he's planning.
Yeah, Isaiah 46, 9 through 10 gets at that idea. "Remember the former things of old, for I am God, there is no other. I am God, there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning." And there's that. History itself has been written by the God who is eternal, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things not yet done, saying, "My counsel shall stand, and I will accomplish my purpose." And that is a comfort. And this is when the northern kingdom falls, Sennacherib, I think I said his name correct. Is that right? I don't know how to say these names. Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, has surrounded Judah. And King Hezekiah, his faith is kind of faltering, and he sends word to King Hezekiah, the Lord does, via this prophecy that is kind of a prophecy directed at the king of Assyria. It's interesting. But in that, he's able to see what God is saying is that God has determined this moment from long ago, right? And they're not going to be destroyed because God is in control even of the king of Assyria. "Have you not heard? I determined it long ago. I planned from days of old what I now bring to pass." So you're surrounded.
Right.
But he's only doing what I determined that he would do. And that's meant to God's eternal nature that he determines in from the beginning. That's the foundation to where you can say, okay, I can't see how this fits together. I don't even understand what's happening. But God is not like these other gods of these surrounding nations who are just made by human hands. They had a beginning, and all their stories, they came into being at one time somehow of another. Some guy ate some, killed some sea monster and it threw up some god.
Right.
Like really stupid.
Right.
You know what I mean? They're really dumb things. God never had a beginning. The one true God.
And the Hebrew concept of everlasting has also the connotation of unchanging, doesn't it?
Right.
The fact that God, he's not only eternal, but he's eternally the same.
Yeah. And that I held on to that to bring it out in the faithfulness part of God. That's the third thing that we observe.
Okay.
The second, though, is that he's holy.
Okay.
So he calls him, "O Lord, my God, my Holy One."
Mm-hmm.
And God's holiness is, I don't know. This is, if you think about it, like, is it an attribute of God or is it the sum of all his attributes? Like, it's a strange one, right? It's who he is in everything.
Mm-hmm.
You can say he's other, and I was reading in one commentary, and they pointed out, in this instance, it seems that the prophet is getting at something else other than that God is just simply other, because the surrounding nations could say the same thing, and to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
They would say, well, our God is other too. He's not like, he's not a person. He's not material.
Right.
But that's not the emphasis. And the emphasis here is kind of the emphasis on what Isaiah gets at. You remember where Isaiah encounters God in his throne room, the king, in the year that King Uzziah died. He saw an image of God, and it's like that of a man sitting on a throne. He doesn't like see the rest of him. He's like sees his feet in his robe. And we know from John that he sees Jesus from the Gospel of John. And in that picture, the angels surrounding the throne are hiding their faces from God's glory, and they're singing, "Holy, holy, holy." And that's who God is in his character nature. He's holy, holy, holy. And what's communicated there in the imagery is really his moral purity, because they're hiding themselves. These sinless beings can't even look on him because he's so morally perfect. And then Isaiah, he thinks he's going to be disintegrated. Like, I'm undone. That means like I'm being disintegrated. I'm destroyed. God's holiness is destroying me. I'm going to die. And so God sends the seraphim, cleanses Isaiah, and we get that great picture. The component of God's separateness is that he is absolutely morally perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And Habakkuk seems to be communicating the same idea, and that's what brings up the tension, as we'll look at later on, because he says, "You who are of pure eyes and to see evil." And so he is recounting that God is holy. And while that is important, and why that is a foundation, I think, is because even though Habakkuk cannot see it, right, or understand what's happening, he's appealing to God's character, and that he knows that a holy God will always do what's right. I think that's the idea.
Yeah.
You may not, at the time when you're going through bad things, like, you may not get to see it. You might think everything is wrong. Like, this shouldn't have happened. I don't see any possible justification for this. Because we have this small little window of perception,
right,
of reality. God sees the whole picture. All our lives are interconnected. Things are happening to us that will influence our children and conform them and make them who they are. We have no clue. But the one thing you can bank on is that God will never do something that's wrong.
right.
He can't do it. He can't do a wrong thing because he can't deny himself. He can't violate his own nature.
Mm-hmm.
We don't it's strange to think about God not being able to do things, but it's clear that he can't. He
Right.
can't lie.
Mm-hmm.
He can't sin. He can never do an unjust thing,
Right.
And that's because he's holy.
Right.
And I think that's that grounding aspect of it.
Yeah, and that is the tension. We've talked about that in the first sermon, is that he's good,
Right.
and a lot of people, they'll say, well, God is good, but he's not able to keep all these bad things from happening.
Mm-hmm.
He's still good, so that they try to excuse
Right.
the bad things that happen by taking away some of God's sovereignty.
Right.
But we have Habakkuk already assuming that God can do all things, and that he could do otherwise.
Right.
He could
do something
else, right? Because he's sovereign.
Uh-huh.
And so we have to hold those two together, that he's sovereign, but he's also good.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything that happens to us, even the most horrific things, come from a sovereign God who is also doing good.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. And we have to hold those two ideas together.
It's a difficult thing to see, especially in the moments that everything's happening.
Right.
You know,
Joseph. That's why we have to have this understanding before it happens, because in the moment we're not going to look around and say, "Oh, this is from a good God."
Right.
Right. And sometimes things seem like they're out of control. That's why we already have to have this understanding that God is sovereign, that God is good.
It makes you wonder when, like, Joseph got the full pic. When did he get the picture?
Right.
Because he went through many years of suffering and pain.
Yeah.
Evil that was done to him. And I have to believe, as a human, he did not have the perspective that he had when he forgave his brothers until later. Like, he looks back and he sees, what? I'm the most powerful man in the world? Other than Pharaoh. He's running the world for Pharaoh. Right. And God's given me this wisdom, and God has empowered me to save the known world and my brothers. And God's like, he sees it after the fact. Right. But while he's going through it, like, that's difficult.
Right. And
that's always the same case for us. And that's why beforehand you need the foundation. So at least the one thing you can hang on to, and I think he's hanging on to, right? If he's about to sink under the waves of the ocean, like, he's got a life raft, and the life raft is, God always does what is right because he is holy.
Right. Yeah. This is why theology matters. This is why we encourage people to read theology, to think about theology. It's not something that's just for scholars. I can't tell you how many times I've had people scoff at the idea that we need to understand doctrine. It's for these practical times. It's so you can pull it out of your tool chest when you need it the most.
Right.
Right. So God is eternal. He's holy. The third one is
God is personal.
Okay.
And the way that Habakkuk is referring to God is my God, my Holy One.
Yeah.
This isn't just some throwaway words. God's not an idea to Habakkuk. He's not even just the covenant God of Israel to Habakkuk.
Yeah.
He's personal to him. He's his personal God, that he knows him personally. And I think one thing that we should pick up on out of this component that needs to correct a lot of our thinking about God is that God is a person. God is a person, though we maintain his transcendence, and his holiness does that, obviously, to a degree that he is outside. He is other. His personal... Go ahead, are you going to say something?
Well, it just kind of hit me that he's personal in his very being because he's triune. And so the Trinity is always personal.
Right.
There has never been a time when God has been impersonal. He's always had a relationship within himself.
Right.
And so out of an overflow of that love that the Father has for the Son, there's creation.
Right.
And they invite people into that relationship.
Right. And this gets to kind of a switch in a lot of people's thinking. Like, God desires to have a relationship with people. We wrongly assume it's because something's lacking in God. Like, that's the default human position. Like, God created, he wants to have a relationship with humans. They won't maybe not go so far to say as God's lonely, but something in God needs the relationship with other people. That's not the case.
Yeah.
It's actually switched.
Yeah.
God, as a perfect being, he is the greatest, I don't want to say thing because he's not a thing, but he's the greatest being of the universe and the center of all joy. And so out of an overflow of who he is, like you said, he wants to give other people that experience. That sounds really, like, we think about it in human terms, you think, that's so, like, conceited. But for God to want to give you something else other than himself would be idolatrous.
Right.
Like, if God thought, hey, George could be ultimately satisfied and have pure maximal joy in who knows what, video games, who knows, like what, pick something, pick anything, wealth, I mean, that would make God an idolater if he wanted to pursue giving you that.
Right.
But God's pursuit is always to give the human intimate relationship with himself, because that's the greatest good that he can do to a human.
Right.
And it's an overflow of his goodness.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe people miss what actually made Eden a paradise. Right. It wasn't just that there was no sin and that they were surrounded by all these, trees that had all kinds of good food. It was that this was the place where they walked with God. They had a relationship with God. That's what was broken at the fall.
Right.
The Adam and Eve being expelled out of the garden wasn't so much now you're not in paradise anymore. It's that you're not with God.
You're not in Hawaii anymore. That's not it. Yeah.
Right. It's that you're not with God anymore.
Right.
You're away. You are being sent away from the presence of God.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And so through the gospel, we're brought back to that fellowship.
And the natural man, we talked about this in the effectual call in the Sunday school class. The natural man will never believe the greatest good that a man could ever experience is God.
Yeah.
You think it's everything else. And that's one of the switches that happens at conversion, is you begin to see God that way.
Yeah. All right.
Well, and I was going to say that this God being personal is expressed the most clearly in Jesus.
Right.
That Jesus came into this world in this pursuit.
Right.
To bring many sons to glory. That many people would be adopted into God's family, that many people would have this type of intimate knowledge that Habakkuk has. And we have this revelation in Jesus even more clearly than Habakkuk does. And what's interesting to think about, there's not a part of God that's unlike Jesus. So like we could think, well, I know Jesus, but there's some parts of God that I don't really know.
Right.
It can't be.
Yeah.
Because of the nature of the Trinity.
Yeah. Was it Philip? Was it Philip in John 14 shows the Father and that it'll be enough for us? And Jesus says, "Have I not been with you long enough that you know that if you've seen me, you've seen the Father?"
Yeah.
Yeah. He's the one who fully reveals who God is.
Yeah, this personal knowledge of God, to know God, it can't be found outside of Jesus. It's only found in Him.
Right.
You can't find it by sitting out and getting in tune with the universe, or doing like some hot Christian yoga or whatever people do these days.
What if
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. What if you just learn how to laugh in the face of death, and that when you laugh,
right,
it's
you're. Yeah, it's winsome.
That's right. This brilliant way of communicating with unbelievers.
Right. Yeah.
Stephen Colbert's Jedi talk.
Yeah.
Right. And impersonal force is not going to help you. It's not going to comfort you when bad things happen.
Yeah.
Like that. Again, we're referencing a free for all a few weeks ago with Stephen Colbert talking about how his comedy influenced his faith, but he talks about God in an impersonal way.
Yeah.
I don't even know what he was getting at with talking about laughter, but that's not going to help people when really bad things happen.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe in a general sense, when you look at the world and you can turn to comedy and just kind of forget that bad things are going on. But if you get a call in the middle of the night that your spouse has been killed in a car crash or something, you're not going to laugh that off.
Right.
Right. That's not going to bring you comfort. This impersonal force is not going to give you comfort. Only a personal God is going to give you that comfort.
Yeah. And people may think, like, how do I even get, like God is so big and outside of everything. I think you remember Psalm 145:18. The Lord is near to all who call on Him, to all who call on Him in truth. He's right there. You call upon Him in Jesus Christ, and you'll know Him.
Yeah.
Don't overcomplicate things.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. All right. What's the fourth one, Jay?
God is faithful.
Okay.
This statement, "we shall not die," is not like a wishful thinking. Like you're sending in this army who devastates everything in its path. leaves a wasteland behind it. People are going to die. Like, that's what happens when nations conquer other nations. A lot of people are going to die. This is kind of an expression that Habakkuk is voicing on behalf of the faithful. There's always a faithful remnant.
Yeah.
And this expression is, we will not be wiped out.
Right.
And so the question is, why would he say that after God's told him what's about to happen?
Mm-hmm.
And this is because this statement, we will not die, is grounded in the faithfulness of God. So God is faithful, and he's recounting that. We will not die because God is faithful. God cannot go back on his promises. And God has promised that through this people, all nations of the earth are going to be blessed. So he can't wipe them out. He may send judgment, and that's what he says. You've appointed them as judgment. You've ordained them as judgment. O rock, you have established them for reproof. So this is going to be a great judgment, a great correction, a discipline. But the covenant remnant, the faithful, will not be destroyed. And we see that as we read, you've got what happens is that, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're taken away into captivity with Daniel, and we see there are a believing remnant God has maintained for himself. Mm-hmm. And they'll eventually come out of captivity. But he believes this not because he's, just an optimist, right? It's because he knows that God is faithful, and he doesn't lie.
Yeah.
He stays true to his promises.
Yeah, and it seems like he is drawing upon the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy 32. Mm-hmm. I mean, he says, you, O rock, have established them for a reproof. You go back to Deuteronomy 32, and that's what God is called. He's called their rock. Uh-huh. And then God just lays out the program for Israel's history, that he's bringing them into the promised land. They're going to rebel. He's going to send people to judge them, but then he's going to judge that wicked nation and bring his people back.
Yep.
And so it seems like just in that just short line at the end of verse 12 that he's remembering Deuteronomy 32. That's what the Song of Moses was supposed to do. It was supposed to be a witness to Israel when they sinned, that this is what God is going to do. He's already announced it hundreds of years in the past, and now it seems like Habakkuk, as kind of the representative of the believing remnant, is clinging to Deuteronomy 32.
Yep. Deuteronomy 32:4. The rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are justice. God of faithfulness and without iniquity, just and upright is he. And so, the term rock is not used a lot, but it is. And so that's a cue that he's getting back to God's faithful to his covenant promises. Yeah. And the foundation of God's covenant promises, and I think the word rock communicates that, God's character and nature is the foundation of this covenant promise. It's not Israel, because they're unfaithful.
Right.
In fact, I don't even know if they've ever been faithful for more than a few years.
Yeah.
Right. Like David goes away and it goes downhill real quick.
Yeah.
And then they have little sporadic moments. But if the covenant foundation is the people, then we never make it to Jesus ever.
Yeah. Malachi 3:6, I, the Lord, do not change. Therefore, you, O children of Jacob, are not consumed. Mm-hmm. So they change,
right?
they move from obedience to unfaithfulness, but God doesn't change, and so he'll always keep his covenant promises.
Yeah. That you got it.
Okay.
We could say a lot more, but we probably ought to move on.
Okay. All right. Well, the first expression of faith to help us is to prayerfully remember God.
Yes.
All right. The second is to complain faithfully to God.
Right.
And when we hear that word complain, that's going to cause some problems.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And we've talked about this.
We talked about it a little bit a couple weeks ago. But yeah. The problem is, I should have pulled this verse out. You may know which one it is, but the problem that humans have is we always think God is like us. Mm-hmm. Israel thought God was like them. That's a problem.
Right.
And we don't like complainers. Mm-hmm. They get on our nerves. Everybody's got the friend or somebody in their circles that complains all the time. Nobody likes complainers. And then we think, my God doesn't like complainers either. Mm-hmm. And then we talked about it. We may get to come to that conclusion based off of how what happens to to the people of Israel after they come out of slavery, after God rescues them, because they complain all the time.
Yeah.
They just grumble and complain.
Well, I was wondering if I don't know if it's two different words, but it seems like in Numbers they are said to be grumbling. And over here, the word is complaining. So I don't know if there's two different Hebrew words that express two different ideas, but it seems like there's this contrast between grumbling and quote unquote complaining.
Yeah. But in our vernacular, they both are encapsulated
right
in our minds into one thing.
Right.
Yeah. And so they're trying to separate what's happening there. And what's happening in the wilderness generation is their complaining, their grumbling is done out of faithlessness.
Yeah.
They don't believe God. Like they think God's brought us out here to die.
Right.
We were better off being slaves. We had food. We had water.
Right.
Yeah. We just saw these miraculous miracles, but you know what? We don't know if we trust this God.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So they can never get it.
Yeah.
Even after all God's faithfulness, they won't go into the land. They're like, there's giants in there. We're not going in there. You brought us out here to let us die out there?
Yeah.
And over and over and over, they're complaining. And we see God discipline them in that.
Yeah. And it seems like the source of their grumbling is that they don't believe God because they don't see God as their greatest good.
Yeah.
Like we said already.
Uh-huh.
They always they don't want God. They want the stuff that God gives to them.
Right.
They want the food, they want the water, they want the comfort, they want the peace. They want to engage in whatever pleasures their heart is set on, and so they don't want God. So they grumble about God's not giving us all of this stuff.
Right.
But what we see with Habakkuk, and I know what we'll see at the end of the book, is that Habakkuk's complaints are towards God because that's who he wants.
Right.
He wants God.
Yeah. Yeah, so he's complaining faithfully. The first step was to base all of this in God's character and nature, which does bring up the tension. Right. He's remembering who God is, and that brings up the complaint that we find in 13 through 17. And it's really easy to kind of see what it is. 13 through 17 is about the Babylonians again. But the issue is, okay, God, you are of purer eyes than to look upon evil. How can you use this nation, who is more evil than Judah, to destroy Judah? The wicked will swallow up those more righteous than he. He's not saying that Judah is righteous because he's already told you they're not. He's saying, like, look, if we do a comparison on the wickedness evil scale, yeah, Judah is wicked and evil, but the Babylonians are way more.
Right.
So you're going to let these people that are more evil swallow up those that are more righteous than they are.
Is Habakkuk also seeing that God is not? He's not saying, well, the remnant's going to escape.
Right.
This. Is there maybe a sense in which he knows that people like Daniel and Shadrach,
are going to suffer?
Are going to suffer and go through it also?
Right.
That he's not going to just remove them. They're going to have to go through it also.
Yeah, I think probably. I mean, we don't know what had happened to Habakkuk, but
right. We know what happens to Jeremiah, and he's
yeah.
prophesying around the same time as Jeremiah, right? We know Jeremiah. He lives to see it. He sees it, and he's actually carried away to Egypt by unbelieving Israelites.
Right. Yeah. So the righteous suffer along with the unrighteous in the judgment. Though they won't be wiped out. He's already said that. But yeah, so he's grappling with this whole idea is how, and people do too. I mean, you look at the world and you say, maybe not to this degree, you say, how come I live this way and other people who live contrary to God, their life seems better than mine in this world?
Right.
That's a tension that's always there.
Yeah.
So, and that's the complaint. It's a legitimate complaint because he stopped short of accusing God of sin or saying God is unjust. He's just saying, look, this is who you are.
Mm-hmm.
This is what's happening. I can't reconcile the two.
Yeah.
But voicing the complaint is an act of faithfulness.
Right.
What would it be better to do? Not say anything?
Right.
Like go complain to somebody else?
Uh-huh.
Like he takes it directly to God.
Right.
And I think that gives us leeway to understand that not all complaining to God is sin. If it's done in faithfulness, faith in God and who he is, like he did at the beginning, then he moved to the complaint. That is an expression of faithfulness, and it's all over the Psalms. The Psalms are full of these. I'm not going to read the whole Psalm again on here, but Psalm 102, Psalm 102 captures this perfectly because he's literally complaining like his life is terrible. Like you read it, the way he describes himself, very expressive. But then he moves immediately into the greatness of God. Like that's his hope.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I think you're free to complain. I mean, you can complain to God. Mm-hmm. It'll keep you from, there are two things that I think that it keeps you from doing is it keeps you from falling into utter hopelessness. Like if you can't complain to God about real issues and problems you have in this world, you're prone to falling into just utter hopelessness. Or you'll become like Job's wife. You'll become an apostate who's willing to curse God. Curse God and die. That's her advice to Job.
Yeah.
And we don't want to end up there either.
Right.
And so people follow that pattern. You see it in the world today. Mm-hmm. Either fall under utter hopelessness, their theology isn't there to even help them, or they just curse God and blaspheme God and apostatize.
This may be a big reason for all the deconstruction stories that we're seeing, is because they don't have the theology, so they're not praying theology, but they aren't bringing their complaints to God. They're complaining about being hurt by the church or whatever their reason is, and they're leaving. Right. Instead of doing what Habakkuk is showing us.
Yeah. So that's it. That's the second. That's the second expression of faith is to complain faithfully.
Okay. And then the last one is to wait diligently for God.
Yeah, that's 2:1.
Okay.
And this one, he just gives the illustration of like a soldier taking his post on a watchtower. He becomes a watchman. He's saying, I've complained. Now I know you'll respond. I'm going to take up my post, and I'm going to wait diligently, looking out on the horizon, like a soldier would wait to see if there's a coming army or good news. Good news can come too. But I'm just going to wait there diligently and faithfully and patiently because I know you're going to respond. And I want to see, what is your response to my complaint? That Babylon is just swallowing up nations. We didn't describe them, but the illustration that Habakkuk uses is that of a fisherman. And he says, Babylon, look, they just take up all they want. Like a fisherman catches fish, he catches them, he empties his net, he fills his net up again. And that's the imagery that he uses of the Babylonians. And the question is, will you let it go on forever? Verse 17. Is he then to keep on emptying his net and mercilessly killing nations forever? And so he's waiting. What's God going to say when I ask him, you've raised up the Babylonians, they're taking all they want, are you going to let them continue forever? Mm-hmm. So now he waits for a response.
Okay. We're probably not very good at this.
Right.
we might be good with complaining, and maybe with crying out to God when bad things happen. But waiting, that's probably not our strength.
Right. Yeah. No, things have changed so quickly. Like I gave the illustration of the DMV. Everybody hates the DMV. So that's the place everybody waits, right? And everybody hates it because it's the one place in your life where you can't have something instantly.
Yeah.
Like I can't think of another place. If I want my haircut and there's a wait list, like I can get on an app and they tell me, show up at this time and you won't have to wait.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I'll sign up now. So it's like the only place in your life that you have to wait on anything is at the DMV. Everything else you have instantly. Yeah. You got your groceries, you drive and pick them up now. You don't even get to go in the store and stay in line. You know what I mean?
Right. I was telling some kids a few weeks ago that they don't even know what it's like to wait for the dial-up for
the
internet. They don't even know what it's like to wait for the for the modem.
Right.
Yeah. You just pull out your phone and just click a button and there's the internet.
You ever wonder what we did with all our free time before? Because we had a lot of free time.
Yeah, we did. What did we do with all that
Who knows?
free time? I don't know.
Anybody know? Who knows? Yeah. But the DMV, you just sit in there and you just like, you just can't do it. You hate it. And that's what I said. I just made a confession. That's what I do. And I'm DMV. I'm the worst waiter ever because I just look around at the whole thing and I pick it apart and say, insufficiencies here. This is stupid waste of time. What are they even doing? Are they even working? Right? Like they should do it this way. It'd be so much faster. That's how I waited.
You had me when you said that you thought that they should just dismantle the whole thing.
Yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree, Jay.
Right, just scrap it, come up with a whole new system.
Yeah.
But then it hits me. That's how we wait on God.
Yeah.
We wait on God like I wait at the DMV.
Right.
And we are prone to say to God, you know what? I think you should probably do this.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I am going to go ahead and just try to do it.
Yeah.
Or if you do things this way, it would be better. Why aren't you doing this? It's so inefficient. Like we are that way when it comes to waiting on God.
Mm-hmm.
We're not good. We are not good at it.
Yeah.
So Habakkuk, he demonstrates it for us.
Or we just forget about it.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of times we pray about things and then we just forget about it. Mm-hmm. We don't even look. So what you were saying in this under this point is that waiting is not something that is passive.
Right.
So Habakkuk is not passively waiting.
Right. I gave the deal. Drake laughed out loud because I said, it's like a soldier up in a watchtower. He's not going to be up in there playing Clash of Clans. Uh-huh. Well, for those who don't know, Clash of Clans is incredibly popular for younger people on their phone.
Yeah.
They'll play these games, these like phone games. Mm-hmm. Like a soldier that's faithful is not up in the watchtower playing Clash of Clans.
Yeah.
You would say for the older generation, I don't know, what do they play? They're not up there playing spades.
They're not up there doing a crossword puzzle.
Soldiers play spades in their free time.
Yeah.
They're not up there playing spades while the invading army is coming.
Right.
Like you're on your watchtower.
Yeah.
You're diligently, actively watching.
Right.
And waiting for a response.
And this is something that takes effort and discipline. Mm-hmm. It's not something that we can just. We do a prayer meeting on Wednesday nights, and I try to remind people regularly that. Look at the prayer request that you've made. If God answers your prayer, come back and tell us.
Right.
I think that we're so I don't know if I think it's probably just unbelief. We give these prayer requests, but then when God actually does something, he answers our prayers. We're like the 9 lepers that leave. Huh. We forget to come back and thank God and actually acknowledge the fact that God hears us.
Yeah, that's good.
Right.
Yeah. So we want to be patient. We want to wait. You got an example of the one that I came up with was on how not to do it. And we have that in Genesis with Abraham and Sarah.
Right.
When God gives them the covenant promise that they're going to have a child, and then they wait, and they're like, "Oh, there's no child."
Yeah.
Maybe we take matters into our own hands.
Yeah, they wait for a while.
Yeah,
they wait for a while because it seems like God isn't going to actually fulfill his promises.
Right.
We're talking 20 years.
Yeah, and they're getting old. Clock's
older.
Ticking. Oh yeah, older, very old. They're getting very old. Yeah. And so, Abraham's wife's like, "Hey, Hagar's not bad. Maybe she can provide the son.
Right.
He can be the promised child." And they do it. They do that.
Yeah.
And he's born. Ishmael's born. He's not.
Right.
And their life gets very complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And Ishmael and Isaac's relationship is very complicated. And their descendants throughout all time, even to this day, are very complicated because they didn't wait on God.
Right.
Yeah. So that's how not to do it. Habakkuk shows us how to do it.
Right.
He gives you an illustration. It's like a diligent soldier on a watchtower.
Right.
Actively waiting. Mm-hmm. Don't know how long it'll be. Determined to And it takes a measure of humility to do that because it's difficult. You're humbling yourself on God's timeline.
Right. And you're believing God even if you don't see it with your own eyes. I mean, Habakkuk is not going to live to see the fulfillment of this, of what God is going to answer.
Right.
He's not going to see it.
Right.
The ultimate fulfillment of what God is promising doesn't take place for hundreds of years.
Right.
And
you can argue to a degree, and this was what I'm studying this week, is there is an ultimate promise in Habakkuk that we haven't seen. We're still waiting for.
Right.
That's a little teaser.
Okay. All right.
Because that'll come up the next 2 weeks.
Yeah. Okay.
You know what I'm talking about?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yep. Okay.
So that's it.
That's it.
Remember prayerfully your God, complain faithfully to God, and wait diligently for God.
All right.
And now God's going to answer. He's going to respond next week.
Okay.
And it's a big one.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. This next passage is pretty big.
Yep. That's right.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks, Jay, for preaching this.
Yep.
And hopefully this is encouraging. Hopefully it's helpful. I want to remind you of just some really, I guess we could say, just basic things that often we forget. We need to be reminded of these things. And so hopefully that's what we did for you today. We want this to be helpful for you throughout the week. Cause you to study and go back to the scriptures. And of course, as always, we want this to help you to become more and more conformed to Christ. We'll see you next time.